When Paul Walker passed away in 2013, the world mourned the movie star, the philanthropist, the father. But behind the public grief, behind the headlines and the tributes, there was another story unfolding quietly. Inside the walls of several temperature-controlled garages Paul kept hidden from the world. Garages only a handful of friends had ever seen. Garages packed not with Hollywood trophies, but with a collection that stunned even seasoned automotive historians. 12 years later, as estate documents, auction records, and private sales finally become part of the public timeline, we now know what was waiting behind those locked doors. Over 30 extremely rare vehicles, many of them so unique they're considered automotive artifacts. And for the first time, we can trace exactly where every single one went. When administrators entered Paul's storage facilities after his death, they expected a few high-end sports cars, maybe some memorabilia from Fast and Furious, and a couple of weekend toys. Instead, they stepped into a time capsule, a meticulously curated museum of JDM legends, American muscle icons, European track cars, and off-road beasts built for his charity missions. Some cars were spotless, preserved under soft covers with notes attached. Others were mid-project, tools still left beside them, as if Paul planned to return any minute. And several vehicles were so rare, so historically important, that collectors would later battle fiercely to own them. But what shocked everyone most wasn't the value of the collection. It was the intention behind it. These weren't impulse buys. They weren't vanity pieces. They were kept for preservation, for love of the craft, for the future Paul wanted to share with his daughter, Meadow. And when the garages were finally opened, each car told a story of friendship, passion, history, and heart. 12 years later, every car is accounted for. And what happened to them isn't what fans expected. To understand what happened to Paul Walker's cars, you first have to understand the man behind them. Paul wasn't a celebrity who collected cars because it looked cool. He wasn't building a garage to flex wealth or to live up to the persona of Brian O'Connor. His passion went much deeper, rooted in childhood, shaped by decades of hands-on experience, and driven by a lifelong fascination with machinery and motion. Paul grew up around cars, around the culture, around the sound of engines turning over in late-night garages. Long before Fast and Furious, he was flipping vehicles, working on project builds, and combing through parts, catalogs like other people browsed magazines. He loved everything about the process. The hunt, the restoration, the tuning, the drive. His tastes weren't defined by brand loyalty or trends. Instead, they reflected pure passion. He loved Japanese imports for their balance and engineering. He loved American muscle for their raw character and history. He loved European track cars for their precision and discipline. And he loved trucks and off-road rigs for what they could do during humanitarian missions. What made Paul unique wasn't the scale of his collection. It was the purpose behind it. He sought out models that were becoming rare, overlooked, or forgotten. He wanted to preserve automotive history, not just experience it. When he bought a car, he didn't modify it beyond recognition. He kept many of them stock, almost museum grade, because he believed the original engineering mattered. His friends called him a gearhead with a conservationist's heart. That wasn't a joke, it was who he was. Paul would often buy two of the same car, one to drive, one to preserve. He'd purchase vehicles that he knew would one day disappear from the streets forever. And when he found something special, a clean, untouched example of a car he admired, he'd store it like an artifact. So when the world finally saw the scale of his garage, it wasn't the size that stunned people. It was the insight into Paul's soul. A man who didn't just love cars, he respected them. A man who didn't chase trends, he protected legacies. A man who wasn't collecting for fame, he was collecting for the future. If there was one corner of Paul Walker's collection that made the entire car community lose its mind, it was the Skyline Vault, a cluster of Nissan GT-Rs so rare, so meticulously preserved, and so historically important that even seasoned JDM collectors described it as a national treasure. Most fans assumed Paul only cared about the R34 because of Fast and Furious, but the truth is, Paul loved the Skyline long before Hollywood ever put him behind the wheel of one. He admired the engineering, the balance, the AWD system, the racing pedigree, and unlike many celebrities who collect cars for status, Paul was a Skyline purist, obsessed with clean examples, minimal mods, and perfect mechanical condition. Inside his vault were multiple R34 GT-Rs, including a white V-Spec 2 Nur, one of the most sought-after models ever built. A trio of R32s, each with different trim levels and purposes. An R33, kept in near-factory condition. Some of these were personal cars he drove regularly. Others were collector-grade imports kept untouched for preservation. A few still had Japanese inspection stickers on them. What shocked fans most was how many Skylines he owned that were never used in the films. They weren't props. They weren't studio purchases. They were his, chosen with passion and curated with precision. When the estate eventually released several of the Skylines to auction, collectors battled fiercely. Prices skyrocketed into six-figure territory. One R34 nearly broke the internet when it exceeded expectations by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each buyer knew they weren't just purchasing a car, they were purchasing a piece of Paul's heart. But not all of them were sold. Sources close to the estate confirmed that a small number of Paul's most meaningful Skylines were kept, preserved specifically for Meadow and the family. These remain stored in private facilities, maintained, started, and cared for exactly as Paul would have wanted. Because some cars weren't meant for the world, they were meant for legacy. While the Skylines were Paul's personal passion, the Toyota Supra became part of his legacy thanks to the franchise that defined him. But what many fans don't know is that Paul was a Supra enthusiast long before Brian O'Connor ever called one 10-second car material. Paul's garage included several Supras, some stock, some lightly modified, all cherished. He loved their potential. The way the 2JZ engine could deliver massive power while remaining bulletproof reliable. He often described the Supra as the perfect mix of fun and engineering. Here's where the story gets fascinating. Not all Supras seen in Fast and Furious belonged to Universal. Not all were studio cars. A few were Paul's cars, loaned to the production team because he trusted the franchise and genuinely loved sharing the culture. After his passing, the Supra community became obsessed with tracing which Supras were Paul's personal builds versus which were studio-owned. Auction houses confirmed several key models. A pristine 1995 Toyota Supra Turbo, bone stock, sold for a staggering premium because it was tied directly to Paul's collection. A heavily modified track-focused Supra, kept for Paul's private use, sold quietly to a collector under confidentiality agreements. One Supra, believed to be tied emotionally to Paul, was not sold. It was kept by the estate. But the biggest note came when a screen-used orange Supra from the first film, the one that became the face of the franchise, hit the auction block. Despite not being Paul's personal car, its connection to him drove the price into legendary territory, setting records for movie cars worldwide. Collectors didn't just want Supras, they wanted Paul's Supras. Because owning one felt like owning a piece of history, a piece of filmmaking, and a piece of the man who turned an import into an icon. Today, several of his Supras live in private collections across the globe. A few remain sealed, preserved, and untouched, exactly the way he left them. Because to Paul, the Supra wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of a culture he helped elevate, a character he helped shape, and a legacy that still accelerates hearts around the world. While Paul Walker was most deeply associated with Japanese performance cars, his American muscle collection revealed an entirely different side of him, one rooted in nostalgia, raw power, and respect for automotive history. Tucked away in his storage facilities were machines that represented decades of American craftsmanship, each chosen for a reason, each preserved like a museum piece. Paul didn't collect muscle cars for showmanship. He collected them for soul. He often said, American muscle had a heartbeat, a mechanical honesty you couldn't fake. And his taste wasn't random, it was curated. Among the crown jewels was a Ford Mustang Boss 302, a car that blended trackability with pure American attitude. Paul loved the Boss not because of rarity alone, but because it captured an era, one where horsepower wars reshaped the automotive world. Then there was his Shelby GT350, a car he considered nearly perfect straight from the factory. Unlike many collectors, Paul didn't modify his GT350. He kept it clean, mechanical integrity intact. Respect the engineering, he'd say. And he meant it. His Chevelle SS sat deeper in the garage, a thunderous reminder of why muscle cars dominated the 60s and 70s. He had affection for its simplicity. Big engine, big torque, big noise. Raw, unapologetic Americana. But the surprising addition was his Celine S 302, a modern muscle machine tuned for precision. Paul kept it for Sunday drives, often stopping at car meets to talk with fans like he was just another guy who loved horsepower. When the estate eventually auctioned several of these cars, collectors paid huge premiums, not just for rarity, but for provenance. Owning a muscle car from Paul Walker wasn't owning a celebrity car. It was owning a piece of a genuine enthusiast's garage. Some muscle cars disappeared into private collections across the US. Others went overseas. A select few, sources say, were kept by the family, preserved as reminders of Paul's love for an era where cars weren't just machines. They were identity. If there is one part of Paul Walker's automotive story that shocked even the deepest car nerds, it was this. Paul was a BMW guy, not casually, not occasionally, obsessively. His love for BMWs, especially the iconic E36 M3 Lightweight, was something he rarely talked about publicly. But inside his garages sat one of the most astonishing collections of M3 Lightweights ever assembled. Not one, not two, 7. Collectors were stunned. Owning one. E36 Lightweight is rare. Owning 7 is unheard of. Why did Paul love them so much? Because the Lightweight wasn't about flash or fame. It was about purity. It represented BMW at its most focused. Lightweight panels, reduced sound insulation, aluminum doors, motorsport DNA, and a chassis balanced like a scalpel. Paul admired engineering that rewarded skill over showmanship. He also owned multiple other BMWs, including a pristine BMW M1 Tribute build, a classic 2002 Touring, loved by vintage purists, several clean E30s, unmodified and preserved, a track-ready E46 M3 he used for private sessions. But it was the Lightweights that became legendary. When Paul passed and the estate announced the group would be going to auction, the car world erupted. Barrett Jackson saw bidding wars unlike anything they'd witnessed. Buyers flew in from multiple countries. One collector famously said, "You're not bidding on a BMW, you're bidding on Paul's understanding of BMW." Most of the Lightweights sold for record-breaking numbers, instantly capturing headlines. A handful ended up in private vaults. One went to a well-known museum, and several, even after purchase, are rarely driven, preserved as pieces of motorsport history, elevated by Paul's stewardship. Paul Walker didn't just drive fast cars. He understood them. And nowhere was his appreciation for engineering more visible than in the BMW vault he built, quietly, passionately, and without any desire for public credit. Beyond the Skylines, Supras, muscle cars, and BMWs, Paul Walker's garage held surprises no one expected. Vehicles so eclectic and meaningful that they revealed an entirely different layer of his personality. These weren't headline cars. They were personal cars. One of the standouts was his 2005 Ford GT, an American masterpiece built to honor the Le Mans legends of the 60s. Paul adored its heritage. He considered it one of the most beautiful expressions of Ford's racing spirit. When it hit auction, collectors fought over it with ferocity, knowing it was one of Paul's most cherished drives. Next was a 1973 BMW 2002 Touring, a funky European hatch that most Hollywood stars wouldn't look at twice. Paul loved it for what it represented: practicality, character, charm, and a connection to the roots of BMW's modern identity. He also owned an Audi S4, tuned modestly for daily driving. Friends said Paul often chose the S4 over exotic cars because sometimes you just want to blend in and enjoy the road. It was the car he drove when he didn't want attention, ironically making it one of the collection's most meaningful pieces. And then came the off-road machines. Paul used several F-250s, Jeeps, and lifted trucks for reach-out, worldwide missions. These weren't collector pieces. They were tools, workhorses, vehicles that carried food, water, and medical supplies into disaster zones. Many of these trucks were kept, preserved, or integrated into ongoing ROW operations. He also owned a number of motorcycles, from dirt bikes to rare street machines. Some were sold quietly. Others were given to close friends. A few remained sealed away, untouched. What ties all these hidden gems together is simple. Paul didn't collect for status. He collected for meaning. Every vehicle, no matter how rare or humble, carried a story. And 12 years later, whether sitting in private vaults, museums, or family storage, each of these hidden gems remains a reflection of the man who loved them, not for attention, but for passion. In January 2020, years after Paul Walker's passing, the world finally witnessed something historic, the moment his estate released a portion of his collection to the public. The venue was Barrett-Jackson, one of the most prestigious auction houses on Earth, and the lineup was unlike anything they had ever handled. 21 vehicles, each tied to one of Hollywood's most beloved actors and one of the car community's most respected enthusiasts. The atmosphere was electric. Collectors, fans, and automotive historians packed the auction floor. This wasn't just a sale, it was a global event. The first vehicle from Paul's collection to hit the stage drew immediate applause, and within seconds, the bidding war erupted. The prices climbed fast, not because of celebrity hype, but because these cars were museum-grade examples curated by a man who understood automotive heritage better than many collectors. Some highlights: the lineup of BMW M3 Lightweights sold for astronomical amounts, shattering previous records. One alone brought in over $300,000, a price no one had predicted before the hammer fell. His Ford GT commanded a premium that stunned even seasoned bidders. Several Skylines and Supras, vehicles tied emotionally to fans, drew standing room-only crowds. Even his less famous cars, like the Audi S4 and Honda Civic Wagovan, brought in amounts far above market value. In total, Paul's auctioned cars brought in millions, with the proceeds going toward the estate and benefiting his daughter Meadow's future, along with long-term preservation of select vehicles. But what the public didn't know was this: many buyers were under strict confidentiality. Several cars were purchased by museums, some by private collectors who promised the vehicles would be preserved, not flipped. A few even went to longtime friends of Paul's, people who knew him personally and wanted to protect the cars the same way he had. As the final hammer dropped, something became clear. This wasn't the dispersal of a collection. It was the passing of a legacy, one piece at a time, into the hands of people who valued Paul's vision as much as he did. Even though many of Paul Walker's cars went to auction, a surprising number never left the family's hands. These were the vehicles Paul loved most personally. The ones with memories attached, the ones he used with Meadow, the ones he never wanted modified or sold. Sources close to the family confirm that several of Paul's most meaningful cars are still preserved today, stored in climate-controlled facilities, and maintained with meticulous care. Among the preserved vehicles are a handful of Skyline GT-Rs, including one believed to have been Paul's favorite, a near-stock Toyota Supra, kept exactly as Paul had last driven it, several off-road trucks that Paul used for reach-out worldwide missions, a reminder of his hands-on humanitarian work, a Mustang connected to father-daughter memories, motorcycles with sentimental value. Family friends have said that the goal was never to build a shrine, it was to protect what mattered. Meadow didn't choose these cars because they were valuable. She chose them because they reflected moments in her father's life she never wanted lost. Some of the cars are started regularly to keep them healthy. Some are maintained by specialists Paul once trusted. Some sit untouched, their interiors exactly as he left them. Keys still in the cup holder, sunglasses still on the dash. There are also vehicles that were preserved for historical significance, both to Paul and to car culture. These include rare imports and early JDM models Paul believed should be protected for future generations. What remains is more than a collection. It's a living archive, a blend of memory, engineering, passion, and heart. 12 years later, these preserved vehicles remain a silent but powerful tribute to who Paul was off-screen. A man who cared deeply, a man who collected responsibly, a man who believed cars were art, legacy, and history. As the story of Paul Walker's cars comes full circle, one truth becomes undeniable. His garage wasn't a playground for a Hollywood star. It was a sanctuary built on passion, precision, and authenticity. Each car he owned told a story, and together those stories form a legacy far greater than any film role could ever express. Paul's collection revealed a man who didn't chase trends. He chased meaning. Whether it was a pristine Skyline R34, a row of M3 Lightweights, or a battered off-road truck used for charity missions, every vehicle represented a piece of Paul's identity. His curiosity, his discipline, his generosity, his love for the open road. The cars that were auctioned off now live scattered across the world, in private vaults, museums, and collections. Some are driven occasionally, others displayed with reverence. But no matter where they are, one thing remains constant. The owners know exactly whose garage those vehicles once belonged to, and they treat them accordingly. The cars kept by the family, silently preserved, form a more intimate legacy, one protected not by fame or fandom, but by love. They stand as reminders of who Paul was to the people who mattered most. 12 years later, his collection continues to influence car culture. Enthusiasts still argue about his best builds. Collectors still chase the models he preserved. Row W's continues his humanitarian work, and Meadow protects her father's memory with grace, humility, and the same quiet strength he carried in life. Paul Walker didn't just leave behind a film legacy. He left behind a garage, a testament to passion, precision, joy, and purpose. Engines fade, headlines fade, movies fade, but a legacy built on love, authenticity, and passion that never fades. And in every car Paul Walker ever owned, every preserved engine, every carefully maintained chassis, every rare import stored in silence, his spirit still rides.